Ryan Grove. This is my wife, Tiffany Grove. We've been struggling through this difficult task of discussing the possibility that history might not be what has been told to us by conventional education and Western media. And the most difficult thing for me doing some of the research here is trying to figure out sort of an overall narrative that links together these ancient buildings that, like I said, are all over the world, and all this anomalous engineering stuff with the other stuff that we've been talking about. So after a little bit of struggling, I've finally been able to glean what I think is the conspiracy theorists' narrative concerning Tartaria and architecture. And to the best of my ability, this is kind of loosely what I think it is. And it goes all the way back to Genesis. Now, in Genesis 6, it says that some of the angels, came down from heaven, and according to the book of Enoch, 200 of them landed on Mount Hermon, and they made a pact that they would make this world theirs and do whatever the angels do when they're on earth. But one of the things that they do, according to Genesis 6, is they looked upon the daughters of men and found them beautiful and took whomever so they chose to be their wives. And they bred with human women. And the offspring of a supernatural, probably super fecund angel mixing its DNA. And angels can have corporeal bodies too, because we know that in the angels that went to Lot and Sodom, that the people of Sodom looked at them and lusted after them and wanted to rush the house so they could engage in their nefarious pleasures with the angels. The angels came in and they dined with Lot. So we know that they do have bodies, and there's other times where they've actually interacted physically with the world. And when these angels' DNA, I guess, mixed with human DNA, the product was super humans, like giants or whatever. And also, Genesis says that, by the time God was ready to unleash the flood, that all flesh had been corrupted. All flesh. It didn't say all human flesh or all humans, it said all flesh. And when there's also references accusing these fallen angels of not only breeding with human women, but trying to corrupt the genetic makeup of all of God's creatures. And as a side note, it is believed by some people,
mystery religionists
especially, that
which you are sounding quite like.
Well, I'm just telling you what. I'm not saying I believe this. I mean, I believe some of this, but I'm not saying that this is my story. This is what I've been able to try to piece together about this whole Tartarian conspiracy. And so these giants, the offspring were giants, and the Bible calls them men of renown at some point. And so they go out and they start building cities, and then there's the flood. And I wanted to get back to the possibility. I know this makes a lot of people uncomfortable, is that they were also able to breed with animals, in that that particular set of offspring resulted in the creation.
Sasquatch, the
dog-headed men from Egypt, or the
werewolves,
Minotaur,
vampires.
all of these human-animal hybrids. So anyway, that's just part of this tale that I'm telling.
There could be mummies too, I don't know.
Well, there's lots of mummies.
I mean, walking around.
So then after the flood, either A, some of that tainted genetic, those tainted genes made it through the flood, through the wives of Noah's 3 sons, or after the flood, the angels were up to their old nefarious tricks again and doing the same thing. Because even as soon as Nimrod, in Babel, future Babylon, Nimrod was described as a giant and a mighty hunter. And after God confused the language at the Tower of Babel, that there was a migration out because of the barrier created by the different languages suddenly coming up. And apparently, most humans stayed where it was warm, more or less. This isn't an absolute, but they generally spread out east and west, like across northern Africa and southern Europe, and they went to India in the east and to like Southeast Asia, like the Himalayas and the bigger folks.
Something that's supposed to biblically coincide with that is the possibility that that's when the Rock of Gibraltar broke.
Oh, when the flood, yeah, that like Spain and Africa were connected, and I've heard a legend that the Mediterranean Sea was actually the Mediterranean Valley, and somebody else.
Which would be another reason for their disbursement.
And at some point, the Rock of Gibraltar broke, and that was a mini flood of itself, and it just covered. And interestingly enough, since we're going down that tangent, there are hundreds of cities, or hundreds of ruins of cities, like with city grids and stuff, at the bottom of the Mediterranean. So that's something to think about, surely. But lest I get confused and go off course, the bigger people, they either A, went off with certain bands of humans and became their kings for pockets, little kingdoms like across northern Europe, and that's what some giants did. But it's alleged that another set of giants, just strictly giants, moved en masse north and to the east and established the kingdom of Tartaria. Now, it should also be known that in the book of Enoch, Uriel is an angel that has been given to cover the world, and Tartarus. And Tartarus, in Hebrew, even in Greek mythology, it's the underworld or whatever. Or it's I think that in Greek mythology that's where the Titans were put after the Ragnarok. No, that was the Norse, but after I don't know. After the big battle between giants and titans, that the Titans went to Tartarus.
And Rhea or whatever.
Yeah, those are actually the parents of Titans. Like
Yeah.
Cronus was a Titan. But anyway, so it's interesting that in Hebrew, Tartarus is the place where the fallen angels go. That's their prison. So when they established their kingdom, before they were destroyed again, after the flood, they didn't name it Tartarus or Tartaria, probably. That was probably the name given to them by humans outside who saw them as giants. And anyway, there's probably some correlation there between Tartarus and Tartaria. So anyway, the story goes on where they build these extraordinary cities, these extraordinary buildings, and they're just whooping butt, and of course they need more and more land, especially if they reproduce, because it presumably requires a tremendous amount of food to feed a giant as opposed to a man, and they're forever expanding their kingdom. And that push evidently went east, and I've heard that the Great Wall of China was either A, built by the people living on the east part of Asia to keep the Tartarians out, or
I've heard it was originally the Wall of Magog.
Or
That's
it was actually built by the giants of Tartaria to keep all of the humans at bay. Because also presumably, for some reason I haven't sketched out yet, but that the giants don't reproduce as quickly as humans. And so of course a giant casualty is much more severe, has much more severe impact, on the society than if a human does. And perhaps they were dying off gradually with all their conquests.
Do they live longer like the Ents do, though, since they're large?
I don't know, go ask your mother. So anyway, they took over. Oh, incidentally, they're also it's alleged that they also were fair-skinned and had red hair. And there's two things that I should say about that, is that, white people are called Caucasians after being sourced in the Caucasus Mountains, I presume, which is in the same region. And also, I've heard reports that when we think of Mongols from Mongolia and Genghis Khan, that it's European biased that portrays Genghis Khan as somebody who looks more, Oriental or Asian, but contemporary scribes and historians described him as the Mongols being fair-skinned and having red hair. I don't know, just a side note. So apparently, after having conquered Asia...
Well, the red hair, to be fair, could come from the Duhare tribe, which is spelled D-U-H-A-R-E, which is possibly an Irish tribe that was here and is pre-Columbian. They were tall, they said.
Yeah, see?
Fair complected.
Well, here's the deal. Like I said, that some of these giants went to become kings of just humans. But Tartaria was unique in that it was an entirely giant society. So after they conquered Asia, they pushed on and conquered North America and began to establish forts and cities here as well, and took over South America and Central America, like I said last night. Now this whole time, not this whole time, but there comes a point when presumably their population begins to decrease, and it would make sense that they would...
like the elves had to go away to Middle Earth.
Yeah.
Or leave Middle Earth.
Yeah, that's right. So, anyway, this isn't my story, okay? This is just what I'm kind of picking up here, and it's a lot of fun. It really is. It's almost as fun as Lord of the Rings. So they had to make allies with some humans, and eventually humans were integrated into their society. And now at some point in the last, and this went on for a long time, and the symbol of Tartaria was the owl, by the way. And I saw a picture of Thomas Edison showing off like the telegraph or something, and he's in what looks like some old world building, and there's this giant desk sitting there, and engraved on this desk, this massive desk, is this owl. And this particular owl that was on the desk showed up in an I got notes. It showed up in a book, a British book from 1783, which was a book of world standards and flags. And coincidentally enough, Tartaria was cataloged in this book with having its flag, and it had this same owl. And to help support the fun of the story, remember Bohemian Grove has that huge giant owl on it. And remember Khalifa was a queen. She was an Amazon queen, but
some people say that she was a Moor and a pagan.
That's because she fought for the Muslims at some unknown battle, or we don't know the location of it.
And that it was actually Hernan Cortez who came to this region. He was Spanish, and that he named the region after
Khalifa.
Queen Khalifa, yeah.
So neat. But at some point then,
But there was also a book written, a fictional book, about a island that was similar to the island of the Amazons, where these women populated it, and it was at one time, like you said before, something about California being an island. It was at one time falsely thought that California was an island just because of mismapping, but at the same time, there were maps that were accurate that showed that it was actually a peninsula, and also it cannot collapse into the ocean because there's nowhere for it to fall, since the San Andreas fault line runs parallel. So, or the schism is, they're horizontal plates, but California is solidly on two tectonic plates, and it can't. It could never fall into the ocean.
Okay, that's good to know. Phew! Thank goodness, Los Angeles.
Well, you brought that up.
I didn't think I brought it up here. I just brought up that in a conversation
yeah.
to you specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't.
I just wanted to.
I thought our conversations were intimate and private with one another.
Sure.
Let's see, you're gonna play dirty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, anyway, that's a good point. So anyway, at some point, the last 1,000 years or so, there was a worldwide cataclysmic event which apparently created this horrible thing called a mud flood, where just this immense amount of mud just seemed to ooze over the whole planet, destroying civilization as was known at that time. And now evidences for this.
And when is this mud?
I don't know. So I haven't found anyone who's come up with any. I said in the last 1,000 years.
Okay, I was just looking through my notes.
Is the closest target time. I have no idea.
Okay.
So this mud flood happened, and it buried buildings and megalithic structures up to a degree, and sometimes it enveloped them altogether. And then it's purported that about 500 years ago or so, that as the world and its civilizations were recovering from this cataclysmic event, I also heard that it was possible that somebody postulates that the Black Plague, that was a great reset. That really messed up society. That perhaps that the Black Plague was actually caused by this mud flood event, and that the casualties of the mud flood event were disguised for the sake of hiding this event for posterity, disguised under the Black Death. And what's funny about the
I don't know anything about that, but
what's funny about the Black Death time period, though, by the way, is that after such a tremendous reset event occurs, that these are one of the few times in history when laborers actually have the power, where labor became more valuable than wealth and money and gold, and that landowners and people that wanted work done were actually at the mercy of laborers, and laborers could charge exorbitant prices and become wealthy. And that actually happened in mainstream history after the Black Plague, and where lots of royal families or noble families were created because of that brief window where laborers were to acquire a whole bunch of wealth because labor was in such need
and
at that
also
time.
last time we talked, you talked about ancient maps, and I just wanted to make one point about supporting my concept of world trade being very prolific, and thus the existence of maybe a little bit more modern cities in the Americas. And we found the Piri-Reis map that was written in 1513 in Turkey, and we only, I guess, found a third of the map, but it showed the western coast of Europe, North America, and the coast of Brazil, and it included various islands and Antarctica as well. And so it seems like we had a pretty good command of the oceans and travel at some point to where I could see that there definitely would be more cities around than this being an unpopulated continent, or populated only by what they call Native Americans. But what were you going to finish off about? Like your whole point, the Tartarian spread, and
I'm just trying to illustrate some
mud
narrative
flood.
that I've been able
What's
to
the mud flood got to do with anything, though?
Well, the mud flood is it buried a lot of technology. Apparently, the Tartarians had advanced technology, like they understood electricity, and not only here's another deep end dive here, is that it's alleged that they understood what Tesla understood about the ether and about plasma and about free energy and energy transmission. And I'm not going to go into it here right now, but apparently there's some people think that the spires on all of these pieces of architecture
Were
why
receivers?
Yeah, or something like that. Yes, electrical receivers. And I don't know, it's weird, but so this stuff gets buried for a while, and then after some sort of cataclysmic reset, the remnants and snippets are still preserved through the survivors, but a lot of expertise is lost also. And so people begin to slowly uncover these cities, and slowly uncover these artifacts, and the great reverse engineering race begins, evidently. Now, take for instance, St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg has lots of buildings where you can see that obviously where there was a doorway was meant to be was located several feet underneath the ground.
But isn't that because it was built on marsh?
Now I'm going to get to that. Now I read Peter the Great by Robert K. Massey, and during Peter the Great, it described how Peter was obsessed with having a seaport for Russia, and he tried fighting the Ottomans to get a port to the Black Sea and failed. And they had a port in Archangel, which is in the Arctic Circle, and that's only useful at a certain time of year, and it's really inconvenient as far as getting trade routes to, it's probably faster to go on land than to endure the winter at Archangel. So he decided on St. Petersburg to get into the Baltic Sea, and he built it on a marsh, is what they say. Well, who knows? But they have a lot of... Now, these same kinds of buried bottoms of buildings are found all over the whole world. They're found all over the United States, too. And maybe maybe we can just do one whole episode on just that, where I can point out more examples for the... But I'm not going to do that just for the sake of time here. So this wild story continues up until, maybe they discovered the... I mean, look at there's a building. I'm going to point out a building where people can look it up and check it out. Some of the architecture in St. Petersburg.
Okay, well, while you look for it, I'll tell you two fun pre-Columbus possibilities. One is that the Knights Templar that was dissolved in the 14th century because of heresy are rumored, or possibly is some documentation to prove this, to have come here in 1398 with the help of Henry Sinclair. Hundreds of Knight Templars reached Nova Scotia, Canada. Another rumor is that the Phoenicians had settled here in 1000 BC, and there is said to be a Carthaginian gold coin that features a map of the New World, because they say that the Carthaginians are descended from the Phoenicians. Also,
that would explain Doric columns that were found going into the ocean off the coast of Florida, I guess.
The Malians of West...
Carthaginians would have had similar architecture.
The Malians of West Africa, the Polynesians, of course the Siberians, the Vikings, and they did recently figure out that Beringia connected Russia and Canada.
At the Bering Strait.
It was a land strait, but it got flooded again later.
Mud flooded.
We've got a lot of, so those are some interesting
yeah, they are actually. And
quandary.
A lot more legitimate guesses than
People
this
are thinking of things.
wild story that I'm spinning right now.
And they're starting to think mainstream. I believe that the Americas has been populated for 30,000 years. So I guess that would give some time for your mudflood.
What I was going to say about St. Petersburg then, while you're looking through your notes, is that they have a thing called the Star Fort there. And that's... But, yes, I'm going to go with the Star Fort, but just look up some of the palaces and some of the fantastic buildings in St. Petersburg, and once again, you'll see that same kind of architecture that I've been describing from the World's Fairs and from et cetera and so on. Now, the Star Fort is in St. Petersburg. Now, also in Peter the Great, they talked about the War of the Spanish Succession between Louis the Great and the rest of Europe over the succession of the throne in Spain. And this was a long, protracted war. And during this war, a gentleman by the name of Vauban, or Vauban, became Marshal of France, which is the highest military position that you could achieve in France. And that he got so famous and was so successful because of his design of the Star Fort. And the whole principle of why it was genius was because no matter what wall was being sieged, there would always be a wall that where you could fire enfilade into the enemy. And so it was very successful. And he died in 1704. So he was making and creating these star forts in the last half of the 1600s. Now, we have found, not we, but mankind has found star forts all over the world once again. And once again, these star forts are huge, megalithic masterpieces of masonry and architecture. Megalithic, massive. In the United States, we've got these star forts, just a few examples. Man, I'm terrible at organizing my notes. We have them in New Mexico.
Oh, okay.
At
Thought maybe covering the coast there.
Fort Union, Watrous. You can look it up, check it out. We've got one in Illinois, in Metropolis, Illinois, and it's twin star forts.
Fancy.
California, of course, has Alcatraz, among a few others. Louisiana, it's the Plague Mines Parish, Louisiana star fort. The Pensacola Beach star fort. The Alabama star fort. New York has an eroded star fort. Now, these star forts are huge megalithic, like you just can't stress it enough, but most of them have been reduced to rubble, but the rumble's still there. They haven't been demolished. They clearly have been eroded over a long period of time. And they're everywhere. Now, think of stone buildings that have been built like in the last 200 years, how, we can see buildings that were built 200-300 years ago. We can go visit them around here. Of course, they're being maintained, but the point is that if we took Vauban, or the French were here, the Louisiana Purchase was us buying a huge swath of land and expanded the United States from France, from Napoleon for pennies on the dollar. Even if they were here and France and Spain, for the Spanish parts of North America, had built these star forts, that's still not enough time for the level. I mean, castles, they don't erode that quickly. And I'm sure there are long periods of time where some of these castles that still exist today haven't been renovated, or there hasn't been continual maintenance on them. But these look like ancient Roman ruins. But once again, check them out. Look for yourself and decide for yourself. So, do you have something to say, or shall I continue?
Well, yeah, I would say that a possibility for why a lot of those older buildings were so fabulous is because we hadn't entered the industrial age where everyone is just a cog in the machine. These were skilled laborers, and if you didn't have skilled labor, you didn't work on projects like that. The other thing I was going to say was I view some of the destruction of the type of architecture you're talking about, not just your standard beautiful downtowns that are modernized, but some of the more what you call colossal buildings in architecture. I think we're actually going through a period in history called brutalism. It's an architectural style stripped of anything decorative or meaningful, meant to cultivate feelings of isolation and used by postmodernists and communists as a weapon against people. And the purpose of its construction is to faster alienate and atomize people, and they kind of purposefully leave out or destroy anything meant to elevate. And then that's kind of marked, in my opinion, by the fires that we were talking about before in Buffalo, Toronto, Vancouver, New York, Chicago, and also
after the World's Fairs,
purpose
immediately after the World's Fairs.
Demolition of landmark buildings, destroyed for the sake of modernization. And
But first of all, clearly, if you
whether
see
it be a political concept or just fixing up the downtown.
if
for
you see the photos of them and you see how beautiful
districts.
these were certainly not stripped of any beauty, these old buildings. In
Right.
fact, I would describe modern architecture as being that. If you look at these pictures and then you see what's built on those locations where they tore down the World
that's
Fair
what I'm
now,
saying.
it's
They
just
did
terrible.
not what they've been doing now. That's why they've done it. Is what I'm saying. I don't
Oh,
know
I'm
what
sorry.
you're talking about.
Well, I guess I'm agreeing with you then.
Okay.
I guess I'm agreeing with you.
And
And
we better be done. This is very long. I don't know if this will download very
well, I'm
well.
almost done.
Okay.
So the you know the World's Fair in San Francisco, where they said they built it temporarily, like they always do, and then they tore it down.
Mhm.
Well, the Palace of Fine Arts is still standing today, and so obviously that's not temporary.
Well, some of them
And
could
it
have been
survived.
temporary.
It survived through all the subsequent earthquakes that have happened, and you can see that it's made for real.
Right,
and it's
but
made to
because
stay.
one wasn't temporary doesn't mean that the others were or weren't.
I don't think they could have built that palace alone in the allotted time given by history. That's just my opinion, though.
Okay.
All right, so the mud flood happened, blah, blah, blah. People are starting to dig up, and discover these cities that are partially buried. And, every capital in the United States, every capital building, same kind of awesome architecture. Perhaps they picked these places to be capitals because these structures were already here. And when you look at, the temple at Salt Lake City, check that baby out. And there are photographs of its construction, and there's photographs of construction of several of these amazing wonders of architecture throughout the world. But usually, these photographs show it when it's almost completed, and there's just scaffolding, and they're doing some work on top. And what's ironic is when in the photo I saw of the building of the Salt Lake Temple, the construction of it, that all around the building, there's scaffolding on top, but all around the building, it's totally developed, and there's fully grown trees and vegetation. They didn't clear any of it out, and furthermore, there's not like stacks of materials and all this stuff, which is very, 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 very suspicious to me. So what I think is that rather than all these fast construction dates that have been given to us by Wikipedia and conventional history books, all these constructions, I suspect, were actually renovations. And furthermore, when they renovate these places or these buildings, they found hints and nuggets of technology. And I think that the industrial age is really just a race by people to reverse engineer these artifacts that they've found. And I think Thomas Edison